G'day guys, in a couple of weeks I'm going to be representing Australia by attending the Warmasters GT at the World Team Championships over in Austria, and what I wanted to do today was talk a little bit about the event and then showcase my list by going through each unit that I've selected in detail, why I've selected the units, what my overall strategy is, and then round the video out with a bit of a showcase of my collection as well. So with that being said, let's jump straight into this video on the Warmasters GT.
Look for the blood god.
Alrighty guys, so first just a little bit of information about the WTC for those who may not know what that is. It's the World Team Championships where basically each nation puts together a team of their 8 strongest players and we compete in a head-to-head to see which nation has the strongest team. And part of the WTC is they do a singles event before the big teams event kicks off. And this year I'm captain for Team Australia, so I will be attending the WTC. I'm not playing in the WTC because I was able to, as captain, find 8 players that are stronger than me. So I was able to put together a really killer team. However, I will still be attending the event, and therefore I'm taking the opportunity to participate in the Warmasters GT so that I get some games while I'm over there. And yeah, that's essentially what's happening. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to break down a little bit more information about the Warmasters GT itself. And then we're going to go through my list. So let's pull up the Warmasters GT information. Alright, so first up we're going to talk about the tournament rules. So basically it's over 3 days, the event. Day 1 you've got 3 rounds. Day 2 you've got an additional 3 rounds. And then there's a shadow round that they've got in place to basically narrow it down to get the finals ready. And then on day 3, you've got a top 4 and then the finals. So depending on how well I go, I may not be involved in day 3. And in fact, as captain, there's actually an important captain's meeting that takes place during the finals. So if I did hypothetically make it to the finals, I may have to step out to go participate in that captain's meeting, or I may need to get somebody else to attend that meeting in my stead. It's very unlikely that I'm going to make the finals anyway, so it's not going to be a problem, but you know, that's what it is. And then basically we've got all of the missions laid out here. So we've got supply drop on tipping point is the first mission, then hidden supplies on hammer and anvil, and take and hold on hammer and anvil, so that's day 1. Then day 2 we've got terraform on crucible, we've got scorched earth on crucible, and then we've got linchpin on search and destroy, and then for the shadow round we've got hidden supplies on search and destroy. And then for those who make the top 4, it's going to be scorched earth on tipping point, and then the final is take and hold on search and destroy. So that's an overview of the missions that will be in play at the WTC, at the Warmasters. Now let's talk a little bit about the way that the scoring is done for Warmasters, because it is slightly different than what you typically see at a GT. So here's the score sheet, and basically they use the WTC format for score differential. So basically, instead of just walking away with your 0 to 100 victory points, you basically take your 0 to 100 victory points, compare it to your opponent's, and then you basically figure out what the differential is, and then you get awarded a score based on that differential. So all the scores are up on the screen there. But the important thing to note here is that what this does is it means that it's not enough to just score your 100 victory points. You need to stop your opponent from scoring points, because the differential between your 2 scores is what will determine your total score. Now, I think this is a fantastic system, and I wish more tournaments would adopt it, because basically what this means is that if one player gets 100 and the other player gets 98, right, that's actually, in this system, a draw, because the difference is between 0 and 5. In that case, the difference would be 2. So both players would get 10 round points. Whereas if somebody gets, say, a 50 victory point, but the other person gets, you know, say 39, right? That's a really low scoring game. Difference of 11, you would be getting a 12-8. So the winner would get 12 points and the loser would get 8 points. And that way, the winner of that game, you know, even though they got less points than the person who got 100, because they were able to hold their opponent down to a 39, then they're getting rewarded, because you're getting a bigger differential between you and your opponent. And it basically it creates situations where you're actually incentivized not only to go out and try to score your victory points, but also look at what your opponent could do to score points and try to prevent them from scoring their points. And that adds another layer of skill to the game. Instead of just writing a list that just goes out to score its points, you're actually going, well, hang on, maybe I don't need to score my points this round because I want to save these resources so that I can prevent my opponent from scoring victory points later in the game, thus getting me a higher score overall because it's based on differential. So I think it's a much, much better way of doing it. I think the WTC have got a really good system there, and I love seeing it in place in the singles events. And it just changes the way that you write lists a little bit. It changes the way that you play the game just a little bit, but they're all good quality of life changes. So yeah, that's the way that the round scoring is going to work. Now let's have a look at the maps, because they've announced which maps are going to be in play for each round in advance before lists are submitted, and that heavily played into the list that I took and why. So let's have a look at the maps. Alright, here's your first map, which is the tipping point map. Now, as you can see, it's one of the medium, quote-unquote medium maps, where there's objectives that are pretty easily holdable in your home deployment zone. And then there's an objective, the one on the blue at the top and the bottom in no man's land. They're relatively easily defendable, but that one in the center, very difficult to hold. There's no line of sight blocking. You're going to be having a real hard time controlling that objective. And I think that's really interesting. There's some really good staging points here. However, all of those staging points aren't really linked to any other ones. There's no like ruins that touch, for example. And as a result, sufficiently fast armies are going to be able to get around those sorts of staging points. And if you're hiding behind the staging point, you're quite deep into your own deployment. So I think it's going to be a really interesting map, this one. And that's influenced some of my decisions, but we'll get into that when we talk about the list. Let's have a look at the next map now. So this is the search and destroy map. And again, it's a similar thing where you've got the objective that's in your home, very easy to hold, which is that blue one in the bottom left corner. However, the ones in no man's land are actually quite difficult to get to and quite difficult to hold. Even though you can hold it, if we take that one in the top left corner, even though you can hold that from behind the wall, because of the orientation of that L, people are going to be able to get around in and see into it to shoot you off of it relatively easy. So I think that one's going to be a relatively difficult objective marker to hold. And then the one in the center, even though there is those big L's either side of it, it's going to be also quite easy for your opponent to get angles on that central objective. So once again, relatively difficult objective markers to hold, and relatively disparate staging points on this one. Like if you're in that blue terrain piece in that bottom left, you're holding your home, you can't really threaten the no man's land objectives. You're so far back. That's so deep into your deployment. And then to get into the staging areas like that, the orange one that's in the center on the left, that objective marker is quite well positioned, but if you're in there, you're not holding any objectives. So you can stage there and threaten objectives, but it's going to be very hard to stage and control an objective at the same time. And that's heavily influenced my decisions in the list writing. So just bear that in mind, this map in mind, and when we get into the list itself. Next up, we have the Crucible of Battle. Again, that central objective, like that's going to be very difficult to hold because you have to be exposed out in the open, and your opponent from their deployment zone, they're going to be very easily able to target that objective marker. And anytime that those objective markers are targetable from your home, your deployment zone, it's going to be a real hard time for World Eaters. And then also you'll notice that the objectives on the sides, they're also relatively exposed as well. So that's going to be quite interesting. It is worth noting in this one that those blue ones in the center, in the no man's land, they do touch the edge, which means in order for your opponent to be able to shoot beyond it, they have to get past that objective. So there's some interesting staging points that are relatively far up. So for example, if I'm taking the bottom left corner, I can head along that bottom side of the table and stay behind that blue one on the bottom, and my opponent's going to have to get past that blue one to be able to shoot me. They're not going to be able to shoot me down the side. So relatively good staging and advancing positions, But again, it's going to be very hard to hold an objective that's in no man's land without being very vulnerable to your opponent's attacks. And then the last map is this one here, which is the Hammer and Anvil. And as you can see, this one's probably the best of them all for the World Eaters because there is those forward staging positions. Now, all of the no man's land objectives, once again, are wide out in the open. However, a few of these are going to be hidden supplies where that central objective splits. And I believe when it splits, it goes more or less into those two orange L's that are in the center of the map. So the objective will split like that, and they'll go into the corners. And then you've got that sort of objective in your deployment zone, and then you've got one that's in no man's land, but it's just straight ahead, more or less. And it's going to be holdable by your units within that staging ruin. So that's quite interesting. But once again, those no man's land objectives are going to be very, very difficult to hold. And that's a consistent theme throughout all of these maps. Now, when you're playing WTC at normal tournaments, they usually mix up. They'll do like a round with heavies, a round with lights, and then a bunch of rounds with mediums. WTC this year have adopted just mediums for all maps. And as a result, you get situations like this where it heavily influences list design. Normally you'd be like, cool, I'm going to write a list that can take advantage of the heavies or take advantage of the lights. But in this scenario where like there are no heavies, there are no lights, there is just this, that's going to play into the list that you run. Alright, so the thing that's worth noting with these maps is just that there's not many good staging points for your units in No Man's Land, which means you need to bring tough units that can actually withstand a decent amount of punishment before dying. And this is one of the reasons why I've taken the lists that I have. But let's flip over and talk about the meta for a moment. Alright, one of the other factors that I played heavily into the list design was the current meta. Now, the meta right now is a ton of Imperial and Chaos Knights, particularly the big ones, right? They're really, really popular right now, and the WTC lists have been public now, and almost every team has both big knights in Imperium and Chaos. There's a ton of them, and I suspect that a lot of people are going to be bringing them to the Warmasters singles. Even the players that aren't playing knights for the teams event will probably play them for the singles for a few reasons. One of them is that they're just obviously dominant and very powerful. The other one is that they have very, very good matchups, that they are table agnostic. They don't require a heavy table or a light table. They can take advantage of both because they can walk through walls, so the heavy tables aren't really a problem for them. And then the light tables, they have a lot of good guns, so they take advantage of the light tables. So I think the fact that, you know, all of these objectives out in the open are going to be quite exposed means that those knights with the big guns are going to be able to shoot you off the center. And also, if the knights jump onto those objectives, the knights are inherently tough enough that they're going to be very hard to shift off of those objectives. So I think a lot of people are going to take knights. So when I was designing my World Leaders list, I was like, cool, it has to be able to kill knights. It has to be actually good into knights, or as good as it can be. So that was a heavy factor in my list design as well. And then also the meta's got a lot of Blood Angels right now. You know, a lot of Space Marines, a lot of Death Guard, a lot of Thousand Suns. So factoring those matchups in as well. And it's really hard because, you know, if you tech too hard into the anti-mech, all of a sudden you're no good into Blood Angels because they run almost no mech, right? So trying to find those units that kind of tick both boxes of being good into mech and good into infantry is very, very hard. However, World Eaters do have some very interesting choices in there. So let's jump over and have a look at the list now. Alrighty guys, so here is my Warmasters list for 2025. So it's Berserker Warband, 2,000 points. We've got a Demon Prince of Khorne with no enhancements. We've got Khan the Betrayer, he's my Warlord. Then we've got 10 Khorne Berserkers and a Rhino, and that's where Khan's going to go, obviously. Then we've got 3 Chaos Spawn. We've got a single unit of 8 bound. Then we've got 3 Forge Fiends, 2 Hellbrutes, both with fists and hammers, a unit of Jackals, and then 2 Maulerfiends with Magma Cutters. So this is very similar to the Hellforged list that I've been running lately. The main difference here is that I've basically dropped a unit of 8 bound and a unit of Goremongers and use those points to get a Demon Prince. And then I've dropped the second unit of 8-bound and a Hellbrute and used those points to get 2 Maulerfiends, right? So there's some... The enhancement on the Demon Prince became points that were able to turn one of those Hellbrutes into a Maulerfiend, and then the 8-bound was a straight swap for the other Maulerfiend. And that's how I was able to get it in at that 1995. And there's a few reasons behind all of these decisions. There was a few ideas I toyed with, like 20-man Berserker bricks, but I looked at these maps and decided that there's just going to be too hard to stage them. And you might be able to stage them in your deployment zone and they'll be safe, but when they come out, they are just exposed. And then people are just going to line up, they're going to stay 9 inches away, and they're just going to rain bullets on them and just kill all of them. So I was like, this doesn't really work. It works really well in certain matchups, like the Blood Angels matchup, because they can't really do that. But I think Knights being the common thing, I think that people are just going to go, cool, I'm going to put 3 or 4 Knights out so that they're 9 inches away from those Berserkers so you can't Blood Surge into them. And then they're just going to shoot the shit out of you. And even if you did Blood Surge into like one of the Gatling cannon ones, he can just shoot you at his feet. So I was like, I don't think the 20-man Berserker is going to work for Warmasters based on that. And some of those staging positions were quite small. So I was like, well, if I have a Rhino that's able to jump up into those staging positions, it's a small footprint and it can have Khan and the 10 Berserkers inside of it. And then if my opponent tries to take one of those objectives, I can reactively disembark, which is a really, really powerful ability to just dump a bunch of OC on an objective. So I was like, Khan, Berserkers, Rhino is in. The Demon Prince, I wanted him in because I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunities to use stratagems in this that are going to be very impactful. So being able to put neg 1 damage on means that you can create situations where, say, you charge 10 Berserkers in. Let's say they have a big Knight that's a melee one. You charge 10 Berserkers and a Hellbrute into it, and then into another Knight you can charge your Maulerfiend. And then what you do is you fight first with the Maulerfiend into that Knight and hopefully kill it. Because you've softened it up with some shooting from Forge Fiends, for example. So it's the Maulerfiend goes in and kills. And now if they spend 2 command points to interrupt, use counter-offensive stratagem to interrupt, you can go, okay, cool, what are you going to attack? Are you going to attack the Hellbrute with your big strike attacks? Or are you going to attack the Berserkers? And if they attack the Berserkers with the sweep attack, you can put neg 1 damage on. And now all of a sudden they're probably not killing all of those Berserkers. And then Khan and maybe 1 or 2 of the big axes gets to strike back, and the Hellbrute strikes, and that probably takes that Knight out as well. So in order for all of that to work, you need to have the command points in order to fuel it, and that's where the Demon Prince comes into play. So I was like, cool, I need the Demon Prince, I need the Khan and the 10 Berserkers in the Rhino. The next thing I need is the 3 spawn. Now, I think every list should start with 3 spawn. If you desperately need to cut them, you can probably cut back to 2, but you don't ever want to take less than 2. They're such an amazing unit. And their job is to go, in the Knight matchup, their job will be to go out onto objectives and bait the Knights into an overreaction, because if the Knights just shoot you off, you can sticky it, which means the Knights need to hop on the objective to be able to deny it to you, and that's putting them in exposure range of Khan, Maulerfiends, Hellbrutes, etc. So that's the spawn's main job, is to jump out and bait that overreaction from the Knights, and also to do actions and those sorts of things. Then we've got a single unit of 8-bound. He fills a similar role to the spawn. He's also in there because, like I said, you don't want to tech too much for the Knight matchup and make yourself bad into other things. And he's really good into things like Death Guard, Thousand Suns, Emperor's Children, Blood Angels, all of those sort of things. The 8-bound are really good into. But not only are they good themselves, but they give that +1 to hit versus non-monster, non-vehicle as an aura, which means now your spawn are doing really good things, your berserkers are doing really good things, so they just dial up the damage of the rest of your army really effectively in those matchups. So granted, I think that of the 6+ rounds I'm going to play, I'm probably going to play 4 Knight players, and the 8-bound don't do amazing work in those matchups, but I think I'm going to need them for the other matchups. So that's what the 8-bound are in there to do. We've got 3 Forge Fiends. Now granted, Forge Fiends aren't very good into big Chaos Knights because they're toughness 11 and we're strength 10, so we're winning on 5s. I did the math. The Forge Fiends on average do between 3 and 6 wounds because they're 3 damage shots, so you're generally going to get between 1 and 2 through per Forge Fiend. So it's not really that impressive, but they do activate the Maulerfiends ability, which is really good. And they also they soften things up a little bit just so that when Khan's unit goes in, it now actually just very reliably kills a knight. You know, now when a Maulerfiend or a Hellbrute go in, they just reliably kill it after it's taken 3 or 6 wounds off. So being able to use the Forge Fiends in that way to sort of soften up the targets before your units go in, very, very good. And also in those other matchups, the Forge Fiends are fantastic, right? So especially into the mirror match, if there's any other World Leaders players there running 20-man Berserker units, a Forge Fiend just goes fucking just blasts them. So yeah, that's what the Forge Fiends are in there for. We've got a couple of Hellbrutes in there. Now, the Hellbrutes are really interesting. If you get a Hellbrute to touch a non-combat based knight, whether it be Imperial or Trader, they'll most likely kill it because they fight, they take it down to half health, then the knight has to fight back, and if it doesn't have a gauntlet or a chainsword or anything like that, if it's just stomping, it's not going to kill the Hellbrute, and then the Hellbrute gets to fight again and actually just kills the knight. So now you've got a 120-point unit killing a 300-point unit. It's like, who can say no to that? And that's why I've got 2 of those guys in there. Then we've got the Jackals. We all know what they're there for: sticking your home objectives, screening, that sort of stuff. In the Imperial Knight matchup and the Chaos Knight matchup, depending if they have the uppy downy enhancement on their Imperial Knight, that's the one that allows them to, at the end of the fight phase, they can put their knight back into reserves and then he comes via Deep Strike. If they have that, they won't fulfill this role, but if they don't have that, what's going to happen is they're going to sticky the home objective early, and then they're going to run straight for the next nearest objective and try to sticky that as well, and then also be able to do interesting things like charging and piling into things to prevent heroic interventions, all of that sort of stuff. So they come into play really, really handily, and for 65 points they're an absolute steal. The next thing we've got here, and this is the newest addition to the list, which is these 2 Maulerfiends. Now, the Maulerfiends are particularly good in the Knight matchup for a few reasons. One of them is that they've got really effective melee weapons for dealing with Knights. So their ability is that each time it declares a charge that targets 1 or more units that's below starting strength, you add 1 to the charge roll, or 2 if it's below half strength, which is unlikely to happen. But basically, if the Forge Fiends shoot something and just take 3 wounds off it, they just need to take 3 off. Now the Maulerfiend's going to get +1 to charge, and then each time it makes an attack that targets an enemy unit that's below starting strength, add 1 to the hit roll, and if it's below half strength, add 1 to the wound roll as well, which, again, not likely to happen. But basically, provided that Forge Fiend's taken those 3 wounds off, they're now going to get +1 to hit, as well as +1 to their charge rolls. So that's where the Maulerfiends come in, and then these Maulerfiends, obviously being in Berserker's Warband, are going to get +1 attack and +2 strength, which means they go in with 9 attacks that are going to be hitting on 2s, because we're getting +1 to hit, that are strength 16, AP2, D6 +1 damage, and you have obviously access to a stratagem that's going to be able to put you to AP3. So that's very effective damage. So it's 9 attacks, so it's the same number of attacks as a Hellbrute, but instead of hitting on 4s with the hammer, it's hitting on 2s here, so way more accurate. And then the rest of the profile is the same. So these guys go in and they front load a ton of damage, whereas the Hellbrute does a little bit less damage because it's hitting on 4s, but provided you're not into a melee knight, the Hellbrute's going to get to strike twice, whereas the Maulerfiend doesn't have the Hellbrute ability. So the idea is going to be that the Maulerfiends hunt the combat knights, and the Hellbrutes hunt the Daka knights, and with the combination of Forge Fiends shooting, Maulerfiends shooting, and then a Maulerfiends combat, I'm pretty confident that that's going to reliably kill a knight. So if they put a Rampager out into the middle, or a Gallant, or a Lancer, or any of those sorts of things, you can just go, cool, a couple Forge Fiends jump out, shoot it, Maulerfiend goes in, gets +1 to the charge, charges it, tank shocks on the way in, and this is why I was saying that having those additional command points is going to be really helpful, because tank shocking on the way in, then punching it, spending another CP to get +1 AP, and just putting in that damage is very likely to kill a big knight. So being able to do that combo with the Maulerfiend and the Forge Fiends is really good. Meanwhile, you're going to have a Hellbrute going over into the other knights that are the shooting-based ones, and dealing with them. So that's the general strategy. I decided to give them not the Lasher Tendrils and instead go for these Magma Cutters. Now, the Magma Cutters, granted, they're only a 6-inch range gun, and they're Melter too. So if you can get within 3 inches, they're going to be doing additional damage. But that's, is what it is. If you rapid ingress a Maulerfiend, you're 9 inches away in theory, and you've got a 12-inch move, so it shouldn't be too hard to get within 3, depending on where the terrain is and, this, that, and whatever. It's going to be quite hard to rapid ingress in a position where you can't get shot when you're going up against Imperial Knights, because all they have to do is touch a piece of terrain and they can see frickin' everywhere. So that's going to be challenging to do. But if they do go in and they're within 3 inches, well, they're going to get 3 shots per gun because they got rapid fire, and they're going to be hitting on 4s, strength 9s, and winning on 5s. So granted, that's not great, but they are D6 damage. D6 plus 2 if you're within 3. So the Magma Cutters do go in, and they've got 2 of these, right? So if you're able to get that guy jumps out and you're within 3 inches, you go, cool, 6 shots, and you're wounding them on, hitting on 4s, so you get 3 hits, wounding on 5, so maybe you get 1 wound, but they get their 5-up save, so let's say they fail their save, you're going to be doing D6 plus 2 damage. And just doing that alone is going to mean that you've procced the ability for this to get the +1 to hit. So, and the +1 to charge. Not that you're going to need the +1 to charge if you're only 3 inches away, but it just means that they can be self-sufficient. So the idea will be pull 2 Forge Fiends out so that you can see 2 enemy knights, then pull your Maulerfiend out. Maulerfiend shoots, and if the Maulerfiend's shooting does a chunk of damage, well, now maybe your Forge Fiends shoot the other knight instead, and that Maulerfiend just charges in and kills. And with toughness 10, it's actually got a pretty strong tank shock ability. It's going to do pretty good work there. So yeah, that's the Maulerfiends. So they're an interesting, change. They're 30 points more than a Hellbrute. However, and they in totality they don't hit as hard because the Hellbrute gets to fight twice, sometimes 3 times, sometimes 4 times. So Hellbrute's going to hit a ton harder. But the Maulerfiend is faster with a 12-inch move. It's tougher with toughness 10. It's got more wounds. It's got more OC. It's got an inbuilt invulnerable save. There's a lot going for the Maulerfiend that the Hellbrute doesn't have. So I think having both of them is going to be very good, which is why I've got 2 of each. And yeah, that's the list. So I'm struggling to come up with a name for it. It's currently just in my phone as Warmasters. Part of me wants to call it like the Hell Maulers because it's got Hellbrutes and Maulerfiends in it, but it's also got 3 Forge Fiends in it. So is it the Forged Hell Maulers? That's probably too many words for a list name. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments section below. What you think would be a cool list name, and what you think of this list in general. Do you think this list is going to perform well in a Knights meta or not? So into the Knight matchups, what I'll probably end up doing is putting both Maulerfiends in reserves, and maybe 1 Hellbrute as well. The Maulerfiends are good because because if you've shot something, they can get +1 to charge. If you get desperate, you can just deep strike them in your turn and go for that 8-inch charge. If you take the blessings and you get rerolls on all your charges, that's not a horrific plan. And the reason that I say that is because rapid ingressing them is a risk, because like I said earlier, all they have to do is get toe in on one of those pieces of terrain, and all of a sudden they can see almost the entire board. So you're not going to be able to rapid ingress somewhere where they can't see you. Which is why I did consider Exalted 8-Bound for this exact reason, because they can rapid ingress deep strike, so they don't have to come on from a table edge, and because they're a short infantry model as opposed to a big demon engine, they can rapid ingress into a ruin somewhere where they can't be seen and then spring out. But the problem is you require a minimum of a unit of 6 Exalted 8-Bound if you want to kill a big knight, and probably want a character in there as well. And now all of a sudden you're talking about like a 400 point unit, whereas the Maulerfiends are only 150 points. So you're going to get a lot more mileage out of your Maulerfiends. But yeah, so that's the list. Pretty straightforward. It's very much similar to the existing lists that I've ran in the past, with a couple Maulerfiends added in as unique Warmasters tech. And that's specifically for the Knight matchups. But the Maulerfiends are also no slouch into other things. Like, they still have 9 attacks that are going to be hitting most units on 2s. wounding most things on 2s. They're like D6 plus 1 damage each, so like they fuck things up. One of my concerns is that it's going to be kind of hard to move units around the board, which is why I will be putting probably both Maulerfiends and a Hellbrute in reserves most games. So and maybe a Forge Fiend as well, depending on the opponent, because you want to be able to come in and get angles. So realistically, I'm probably going to be deploying a Hellbrute. Actually, that might be too many points. I'd have to look into that, but how much I can actually fit in reserves. But basically what it'll be is I'll be putting in as much into reserves as I can so that I can actually fit everything hidden on those tables, which is, again, another one of the reasons why I needed the 10-man Berserkers in the Rhino, because I don't think I'm going to have the space in my deployment zone to hide all of these Demon Engines and a big 20-man brick of Khorne Berserkers. So that's sort of where we decided on there. Now, the Demon Prince, I denied for ages about this decision, which was I could have given him an enhancement, but it would mean taking one of these Maulerfiends and turning it into a third Hellbrute, because you save 30 points there, and then you can spend that 30 points getting an enhancement on the Demon Prince. So I was like, well, what's better? 2 Maulerfiends, 2 Hellbrutes, and a Demon Prince with no enhancement, or a Demon Prince with an enhancement, 3 Hellbrutes, and a single Maulerfiend. There's a world where I could have turned one of the Forge Fiends into a Hellbrute and then given the Demon Prince an enhancement there. That could have worked. But yeah, that's what I landed on, and I'm not unhappy with it. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. And as always, if you want to show your support for the channel, head over to blogforthebloodgod.com. You can sign up to our Patreon there, where we have some list writing sessions. A lot of the decisions that went into this list were discussed in that Patreon in the Discord. So we do a lot of good stuff over there if you're interested. And you can also check out our Etsy store, where we've got all types of swag that you can pick up to show your support for the channel. With that being said, I'm going to leave it here. Thanks for tuning in, you guys. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.